What do sea monsters eat for lunch? Fish and chips. What's going on, YouTube? So today we've got a fun video for you. We are going to be tier listing every zone in ESO. There's a whole lot to break down in this video. We got things to talk about, like how many skill points are you going to be getting in that zone versus how many quests you have to do. Are there any good farming locations? Any good sets to sell? Is the storyline good? Is there other interesting things to farm in the zone? And all the little nitty-gritty pieces today and all those fun little zones in the most condensive way I can do, but also doing it in a way where it's still informative. So I'm not going to try to ramble on too much like I normally do. We're going to get straight to the juicy components of it. The first thing you will notice is that the zones are not labeled. So obviously we're going to talk about them as they come up, which is funny because they're actually in alphabetical order for best I can tell, because it looks like we start Clockwork City, Cold Harbor, Cyrodiil, interestingly enough. So don't worry, we'll still mention all the zones, and if there's any notable sets and things like that, we'll talk about that. Obviously, don't worry. But the biggest thing is this is how we're going to be going. So an S tier zone is a zone that is amazing, a zone that you need to go to for one, probably more reasons. Either there's some best in slot farming areas, the zone story quest is amazing, you get tons of DLC, skill points. So for those of you who don't know, when they started making DLC zones, they made you get more skill points faster for doing the quests there, versus some of the base game zones usually gave you to 1 in every 3, 1 in every 4. Some DLC zones, it's 1 skill point per, and some it's 1 every other zone story quest that you complete. The storylines will also be a big part of this too. Niche things to farm, we did our fishing farming video, so if there's great farming spots, obviously that's going to make it, give it some points. Also giving it points might land it in the amazing zone, which is, this is an amazing zone to do something specific. A good zone is just, this is a good zone. If you were like, hey Jake, should I go here, farm this, do that, do this storyline, I'd be like, yeah, it's good. An average zone is, it's like, not necessarily memorable. If you asked me what the zone story quest was, I wouldn't remember. The sets are probably just kind of meh. Some zones, especially the base game zones, might really start to fall into the average zone. And avoid/pointless is a zone that you really don't need to do. So things that might come to mind are areas and islands and places that don't have anything to farm necessarily. We will obviously talk about resource farming and stuff like that also, but an avoid/pointless zone is just kind of like, you don't need to be here and doing anything specific here versus somewhere else. In fact, you probably would have a higher benefit if you did go somewhere else. So starting us off, we do have the Clockwork City, and I'm going to actually show you the sets that are from here because they're all fairly decent and kind of cool. So the first one is Live Wire, which when you take damage, you overload your circuits, applying concussion to enemies within 8 meters, and you heal for 930 for each enemy hit. Mad Tinkerer, when you deal damage, a little venomous thing shoots out and knocks all enemies up in its path. And Unfathomable Darkness surrounds you with evil crows who deal damage to people around you. So the sets here are actually pretty cool, and I have them because they're pretty cool. So Clockwork City is a cool zone. The storyline here is also very unique. If you love the Living Tribunal and you love the, kind of the living god type thing and being around them, I'm going to start off, and again, I might go back and change some of these around, but when you factor in the fact that it's very compact, there's a good story, fast skill points, good sets, I'm going to put this as an amazing zone. You're not going to find yourself here very often farming anything, which is why it's not an S tier zone. There's no like, oh, you need to go to Clockwork City during such and such event to farm such and such thing. That's where it really loses out, for me at least, for the S tier, but we'll go back at the end and we'll obviously redo these if we need to. Next up, we have Cold Harbor, which is definitely an interesting zone to rate because it's got the Golden Vendor. It's got one of them. It's got Zenil, so we go there. You obviously can go there through Craglorn. It's got the Hollow City, which is actually the best in slot area to farm alchemy ingredients, and it's got a good set in Stiggins, and it's got a really cool story premise. So I'm going to put it in the S tier. A lot of people will find themselves in Cold Harbor for one reason or another. Now, it does lose some points for me, but not enough to take it out of the S tier, at least for right now as we're looking at this tier list. because you're not generally farming a whole lot during events in Cold Harbor. You will go there to farm, like I said, ingredients. You will go there through the main storyline. You might want to farm the Stiggin set. But other than that, you're not going to be going there a whole lot often, which you'll notice that during some of these zones, you'll see us actually go there quite frequently during specific types of ESO events. But overall, it's still an S tier zone. This next one is probably a hot take, but it's Cyrodiil. I mean, it has to be an S tier zone. It's the most unique zone in ESO. It's got PvE quest, PvP quest, fully enabled PvP, but it's also still got delves, cities. It's got the whole, scheme of becoming the emperor and grand battles and forts and castles and taking, things from other players. And it's got its own currency and systems and things. I know I'm going on and rambling, but it's got a whole lot of things. I mean, is there anyone that doesn't think that Cyrodiil should be an S tier zone? It's got events that are tailored to it. Overall, it's an amazing zone. I will also note, because the Imperial City is also not on here, I don't think I would put the Imperial City as an S tier. I probably would put it as either an amazing or a good zone, just depending on how I kind of felt on that specific day. The reason why it loses points, in my opinion, versus Cyrodiil is because AP is very profitable, very valuable. Golden Vendor, we talk about her every weekend. Imperial City just doesn't have that with its Telvar. You can still make a lot of money with your Telvar, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't come close. Next up, we've got another good one, and that is Vvardenfell. Vvardenfell, I'm also going to put in the S tier zones. Amazing storyline, amazing sets to sell. War Maiden and Warrior Poet are both really good sets if you want to sell, get a little chunk of money. And even Defiler is actually pretty good too. They're usually sets that sell decently frequently. I've been able to kind of sell them throughout the ways. It also has an item that's worth 700 million gold inside of it. So can you not put it in the S tier for that? I mean, granted, when we made a video about it, we probably had more people farm it. That probably lowered the value of it. But overall, if I told you that a zone had 700 million gold worth of an item in it inside of one of its public dungeons, you probably would bump it up a rank. And then you couple that with the storyline, which also includes the Living Tribunal. I won't spoil anything, obviously, but if you like the Living Tribunal, you like Morrowind, you like the theme of the Red Mountain, you'll definitely like this zone, and I can highly recommend it for you guys to go out and enjoy it. This next one is Glenumbra. It is one of the base game zones in that you kind of come here very early. It's almost like a starter zone, but it's not necessarily the starter islands. I want to put it in average. I think that the time to get skill points is ludicrous. You have to do a lot of quests to get skill points. I will say the quests are good, but there's not a lot of replay value in them. So for example, some of these, you interact with Daedric princes, you go out in different cool realms that you only get to go to once. You get to see so many cool things that even if you have to redo that storyline, you're going to go, yeah, I'm glad I redid this. Or, if I have to get skill points, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go to this zone and do these quests. You're not going to get that in Glenumbra. I would say that the quests are good, but they're not replayable. And as far as sets, there's really nothing of note to farm. As far as during, events and things, there's really not a whole lot to do special in Glenumbra versus some other zones. So that's why it's going to comfortably sit as an average zone. This next one is also going to go in the S tier zone. I know that this might be a bit of a controversial take, but I really do think Hrothgar was pretty pivotal to ESO's kind of long-term success in their way that they do quests and kind of do really good kind of overall storylines that feel like you're moving the plot forward. Sometimes when you're doing some of the base game zones versus DLC zones, it's more so like, oh, you saved this town, or oh, you saved this person who was inflicted with vampirism. When you get to the DLC storylines, you really start to get that much greater overarching zone storyline, because obviously there's the ESO main storyline that you do with the companions, but once you start to get to the DLCs, you really get that good overarching story. You couple that with the arena that's there, you couple that with Pariah and Briarheart, and you've got an amazing zone. I will say though that not a lot of times are you going to be going to Hrothgar to farm necessarily during any sort of like specific ESO events, because of unfortunately just kind of the layout of the zone, and that's where it probably loses a couple points. And at the end of the video, I think I might recycle through where they all sit on this tier list. I think right now Hrothgar actually would stand. I think I would just put Cold Harbor behind it. We'll kind of reorganize them as we go, though. But overall, Rothgar, great zone. It was a great shift from ESO to start making zones like it. And I'm slowly losing my ability to be able to recognize which zone this is just by its appearance on a very small screen. This is Rivenspire, or, you know, with its main city of Shornhelm. I don't think there's a whole lot interesting in Rivenspire. I would say that it's bang average, but I'm going to bump it up to good zone, at least for right now, because Necropotence is a really good set to sell year round. Not a lot of people farm it. The storyline is above average, so you get an above average storyline. The time to get skill points is pretty decent in Rivenspire. The quests are not overly long. They're interesting, you know, they kind of involve some themes of vampirism and whatnot, so that's going to bump it up from just a little bit above average. It's probably going to be at the bottom of the good zone, and I might bump it down at the end, but right now it's going to sit in the good zone. Next up, we have Stormhaven, which is going to sit in the average zone. Stormhaven, unfortunately, is one of those zones where the storyline is above average, but everything else, it's time to get skill points. Sets that are from there are really below average. I will say, to give it some credit, there are some cool leads that drop from Stormhaven. If you want to get one of the best lights in the game, it's from Stormhaven. You have to pick up runes to get it. It's actually like a little white gold tower model. Let's see, big light. I have it in my house. It's beautiful. That's the only notable thing, though, that I can tell you about it. It is an alliance capital. It's got some of the best guild trader locations in the game, but I don't necessarily think that bumps it up to a good zone. You know, you're not going to spend your time, you know, hours on end, you know, at a guild trader. And if you are, you're probably going to be in Mournhold or Vivec City doing that, and not necessarily in Wayrest, which is the capital city of Stormhaven. However, Bankerai is actually a notable difference. Bankerai is actually going to go up into the amazing zone, which you probably are thinking to yourself, that's a little bit odd. It does have two decent sets in 7th Legion and Spriggans if you're looking to get some sell value. But these sets are base game sets, so they've been sold and collected by a lot of people throughout the ages. So it's not necessarily something that's super easy to sell. However, what Stormhaven does not have that Bankerai does have is an amazing area for you to farm event boxes. So any event that requires world bosses, Bankerai is generally considered the best place to do so. And that is because of this little triangle of world bosses here mixed up with a dolmen. It's probably one of the best places you can go if you need to kill world bosses. Fun fact, that is one of the things that you want to be doing for the Witches event. So this is one of the best places for you to go. It is kind of held back, in my opinion, by the length of the story quests. I do think that the story quest is interesting and unique, but its time to get a skill point from it is very long. But you do get to interact with High King Emmerich. It's very cool. It's very nice, but it is lengthy. And overall, though, that's where it's going to sit in the amazing zone, but I'm going to move it up to the top. This next one is interesting because it's the Alakir Desert. And by all accounts, the Alakir Desert really only has the Alakir Desert dolmen runs. And its actual sets from there, not very good. Its ability for you to get skill points for doing zone story quests, not very good. Interest and intrigue from the zone story quest is good. Does that mean it's good enough to go to the S tier? Because it's the #1 area for a brand new player to farm experience, I'm going to say yes. And the reason I'm saying yes is because a lot of times when I make experience videos or I talk about things and ways to make content or answer questions in the community, a lot of people will sometimes forget that the best way to get something is not always the best way to get something. Let's give an example. If you are a brand new player and I tell you to go farm Black Rose Prison, you're probably going to hate the game. But if I tell you to go to the Alakir Desert, you'll probably have fun. You'll be like, wow, there's a lot of people here. I can join groups. I can, get good interaction with people, get some decent rewards. I can slap on the gear that I get from here as I level up. Obviously, it's nothing, spectacular, but I can get a whole bunch of things. I can level up my fighters guild fastest way possible. And I think that's really important. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that, is sometimes just because the mathematical best way doesn't mean it's always the best way for somebody who's brand new. That's why I really like the Alakir Desert. It is going to sit at the bottom of S tier for now. It might be the worst S tier. I'm not sure yet in my head, but we'll see. But overall, that's why I like the Alakir Desert. This next one is interesting because it's Hughes Bane. I'm actually going to put Hughes Bane at the bottom of the amazing zone. I think Hughes Bane is slept on. It's got an amazing storyline, is a little bit long, admittedly, but it adds a brand new guild line, which, you know, you could get some decent utilization out of. It's got really cool sets that you can sell. It's got a whole heist system that you can participate in. I know a lot of people are kind of annoyed at the pickpocketing, you know, leveling up. The Thieves Guild can be exceptionally annoying, but they are changing it to where you don't have to level up your Thieves Guild to actually complete the storyline there. So that was a really cool change that's upcoming in Update 40. I do like Hughes Bane. And if you want a really fun, kind of fun gold making, you know, way, do heists. They're cool. Next, we have the zone where Redonius is stuck for the next 8 hours of his life, and that is Stros Makai. Stros Makai is a bang average zone. It's hard to say it's a void / pointless because the quests there kind of do teach you about some mechanics in ESO. It's a really good introductory zone, in my opinion. I will say, though, that as you kind of look at some of the other starter islands and zones, you look and you think to yourself, well, if I did one, do I need to do other ones? And that's where I think that you could argue that Stros Makai isn't a void / pointless. I'm going to keep it decently higher, though, because it's time to get skill points. It's not terrible. The story there is unique, and it's kind of very, you know, pirate themed, which we don't have a whole lot of zones that are like that. So I'm going to bump it up for now, and it's going to be an average zone. I will say, too, that you're not likely to get a lot of training gear from there, but that does sell pretty decently if you are there. Betnik, though, is not going to get the same treatment from me. I'm going to put it in a void / pointless. The storyline is not interesting. There's only 2 zone story quests even on the island and 3 sky shards. Overall, it's just not a good zone, in my opinion. I think they could have done a little bit better with these starter islands. Next up is High Isle. I mean, we got to put it in the S tier just because that's where you go unlock Tails Tribute. I'm just kidding. Please don't kill me. Please don't click off the video. I will say, though, there's 2 companions from High Isle, an amazing lead. High Isle treasure chests that give you a chance to get some of the most valuable motifs in the game. So because of that, I'm going to have to put it in here. Go get yourself some ancestral motifs. I think it's about a 30% chance every time you open a treasure chest there. It is where Tales of Tribute is. I'm not, you know, please don't kill me. That is where you can go unlock it. The daily quests there for Tales of Tribute actually do give you pretty good rewards. Not again, please don't kill me. The sets there, though, are not really something that you're going to be able to sell, so that's where it does lose some points. It's a beautiful zone, though, and the storyline is good. Decent replayability, because I think there's a lot of interesting things that happen, a lot of interesting instances that you go to. Fun fact, one of the instances that you go to in the second quest for a while was actually the best place to pickpocket stolen goods, and so you could farm some of the furnishing plans there until there was another area that was found that had even better furnishing plans. But now those furnishing plans really aren't worth a whole lot because it's been out for a while. But all that to say, High Isle is an amazing zone, in my opinion. It's probably a bit of a hot take. If Isabel and other companions didn't come from there, it would definitely be bumped down to just a good zone, because really it's relying on its beauty as a zone and its own story quest at that point, and Tales of Tribute, which is not enough. It's bumped up by the companions. Next up, we have my favorite zone storyline in all of ESO, which is Somerset, which means it's going up into the S tier. It's one of those things where Somerset storyline was what hooked me into ESO. I really enjoyed all of the preceding storylines and everything, and I was really interested in the lore. And I remember thinking to myself when I played Skyrim that I really wish there was a game where you could visit all of the regions. And ESO was that game for me. But what really elevated it to the next level, to where I really became interested in questing, because before then I just treated it like an MMO. And sometimes you can get a lot of enjoyment out of that. Obviously, it is an MMO. But when you really like do the side storylines and the side quests and the zone quests, you can get a lot of really cool moments out of it. And Somerset is what sold me on that. Admittedly, The sets there are not very good. It's a beautiful zone though. The actual Artaeum component that goes to it is also really cool, that it has two of the best fishing spots in the entirety of the game, which also means I'm going to put Artaeum up here with Somerset. I don't actually know why they were separated. So all of that to say that in the end, I would definitely suggest that you do Somerset. You get the Sigic order line, you get jewelry crafting, you get a really fun experience, and it will hook you, in my opinion at least, into doing quests in ESO. And don't forget the fishing spots. Next up is Arderon, and that is going to be another average zone. I'm going to put it right up there with Glenumbra. I mean, it's a starter zone. It's not meant to do anything exceptional. I will say that the storyline there is better actually than Glenumbra, so I'm going to bump it up one. And the actual amount of zone story quest is significantly better. For example, tell me why Arderon has 12 quests for its zone story and Glenumbra has 24. Why? What was how? Like, I could get it if it was like, 12 versus 14 versus 9. There's 12 versus 24. I always thought that was kind of ludicrous. It's just something to keep in mind. Overall, though, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time in Arderon on your playthroughs of your character, so it's just one of those zones that just kind of is average. This next one has a special place in my heart, so it's immediately going to be ranked higher than it probably should be, but it's the Gold Coast. You get to join the Dark Brotherhood there. It's got one of the coolest daily quests in the game, in my opinion, just because it gives you a chance to roll for one of the coolest motifs in the game, which is the Minotaur motif. So overall, for me, it's going to be an amazing zone. I will say, though, that it is held back by a couple things, namely that its zone story quest is tied to the Dark Brotherhood, which means that you have to level it up until update 40 comes out. Then you don't have to level it up. You can do the entirety of the zone storyline tied to the Dark Brotherhood all in one sitting, which is exceptionally helpful. But the Blade of Woe is just so helpful. It also adds new kind of mechanics to the Dark Brotherhood for you to participate in, new costumes that are locked behind it. So for me, that's why it's going to be an amazing zone, and I can encourage you guys to go and participate in it. And at least, for the very least, if you do the first quest of the Dark Brotherhood, you get the Blade of Woe. This next zone to rank is a bit interesting. It's actually Craglorn. I want to put Craglorn in the S tier above Alakir Desert. I think it's one of the best social zones to be in if you're looking to find groups for trials. It's got really good things like Skyreach in it, Spellscar for experience, good event areas for you to get, event tickets and farms and things depending on what you need to do. So overall, that's why it's going to be bumped up to the S tier for me. Some of the sets there are decent, like the air sets and some of the other sets are pretty good. But they have been out since the beginning of time, so a lot of people aren't really buying them as much as they are from DLC zones, just because of the way the collection system works. I mean, if you've already got it, you can reconstruct it. So overall, though, it's still an S tier zone, and definitely you should spend some time there. This next zone, the Reach, is also, I would say, a good zone. I am tempted to bump it up because Vatestrand is there, which definitely is a great arena if you're looking for some of the best in slot PvP setups right now. Vatestrand Ice is just absolutely phenomenal. Witch Knights also sells very well there, and the DLC point, it's to actually time to get a skill point is pretty good. It just feels like there's a lot of mechanics though there that don't work for me. Namely the Harrow Storms just don't feel rewarding really at all. You're not going to find yourself in the Reach very often really having to farm anything. There's nothing phenomenal there, no good fishing holes, no good collectibles that you could sell. Really, even the motifs that drop from the daily quests really aren't even exceptionally phenomenal. So for me, I'm going to put it in the good zone. I'm going to put it at the top of the good zone though, just based on everything that's from there. Notable sets to sell if you're actually farming there or questing there is Witch Knight's Defiance. So if you're interested in making a little bit of change, you might be able to sell that set. Next, we've got a bit of a wombo combo here. I want to put them both up here together, and that is because we have Black Reach Caverns and we have the beautiful Western Skyrim. So if you want to have those member berries and go back and see the areas of solitude and things, you're going to really get that from this zone, more so in my opinion than the Reach, because it's a much bigger zone. longer story quest, but still a really good time to get skill points. Overall, I actually prefer Western Skyrim. The sets, Eternal Vigor, Winter's Respite, also sell better. The treasure maps there also a little bit more rewarding. The public dungeons give you some really good recipes that you can sell to make some good furniture. For me, that's why it bumps up just a little bit higher than the Reach, in my opinion. So that's why the Western Skyrim zone and Black Reach are going to be bumped up to amazing. Also, let's not forget that this is where you get antiquities. And while granted, you're not going to spend probably a whole lot of time in Western Skyrim doing antiquities, it is the zone that added it. Next up, we have East March, which unfortunately has lost, in my opinion, a lot of its kind of need to farm, kind of pull and desire to it. There used to be a pie that you could eat there to get a weird like buff that you could continuously get every after a war off, and different kind of unique things that made it a very good zone to do specific quests in a very specific way. But these days it's just an average zone. The sets there, average. Time to get skill points, average. Things that you can farm there, average. And overall East March is average. Riften, we're not going to say anything. We're just going to slowly put it down in the avoid tier, and we're going to move on and not say anything. Stonefalls, though, is actually, I would say, a good zone. I don't like how long it takes for you to actually get your skill points, but that just seems like it was a problem when they started making these base game kind of first zones that you go to minus the starter islands. But this is more of a zone done right. Shadows of the Red Mountain, good set. Silks of the Sun, decent set. You're not going to be making billions of dollars off of them, but it also has one of the best fishing spots in the game, and it's got one of the best areas that you can go to steal from people. It's actually in the exact same spot. We do talk about it in my most recent video in my best fishing holes area. But if you are interested, I will show you. It is actually right here in Ebonheart. This little dock right here, there's a ton of fishermen who are facing the waters. So not only are you able to fish and steal their fishing holes, but you can also pickpocket them twice, blade of woe them once, get 3 stolen goods from one person, and make a really good profit off of doing that. Next up is Deshaun, which I'm going to put up as an amazing zone right around here above the Alakir Desert. And the reason I am going to do so is Mournhold is the #1 area for you guys to go out and go to guild traders. #1 place for that. It's also great during events because people farm the public dungeons, people farm the world bosses, people farm the dolmens. It's got 2 good sets, in my opinion, 2 that drop from there in Plague Doctor as well as Mother's Sorrow. Yes, they've been out for a long time. Yes, they've definitely, been bound to a lot of people's collections and aren't being sold nearly as much as they used to. But overall, it's what I look for in a base game zone. It still holds up to this day. Quest-wise, it still holds up, when it comes to farming it on events. And it still is the #1 place to go to for guild traders. And because it's a capital, it's also going to have all the shrines that you need to reset all your points and do all those other things that you might need to do too as a newer player. What doesn't have that though is Shadowfen. Shadowfen is interesting because I think conceptually Shadowfen is a really cool zone that I loved to see when I was a brand new player, but it just felt like the storyline there was a bit hit and miss, and I think it required you to go and quest a bit too sporadically, and its time to get your skill points there were not very good. I will tell you though that its sets there are sometimes slept on. Robes of the Hist is an amazing set. Swamp Raider is a really good set also. Both of those sets sell decently well even to this day, probably better than every base game zone, barring maybe some of the Craglorn sets every so often that sell from a base game zone. So if you're looking for some good profit, it's where you can go to. But overall, its quest, its ability to do things, and this could just be me having PTSD from needing to pick up those stupid water pots to get the mythical lead to drop from there. But overall, for me, it is still a good zone. Next up, we have Blackwood, which I'm also going to put in the S tier. I feel like I am utilizing the S tier a lot, but because it's so unique. A lot of the ESO zones are much more unique than people give them credit for. So for example, Blackwood has not only some of the best sets to sell, namely Frostbite, but the other 2 sets there sell really well as well. You get 2 companions from there. You get really good lay-a-win blueprints from doing the quests there. The motifs sell decently well from there. You can utilize the treasure maps there to get ancestral motifs that you can sell for a decent chunk of profit. The zone story quest there is really good. It's fast, so it's not requiring you to do a whole lot in between getting your skill points. What more could you ask for in a zone? I'm going to put it just below where I put my little Somerset bundle. It is probably better than Somerset, but I'm a fanboy for Somerset. We are also going to move down Cold Harbor and Hrothgar, and we're going to move down Vardenfell also, in my opinion, as we're kind of rearranging this. But Blackwood is everything that I want in a chapter update. This next one is here, and it did so many things well, but overall it should have done much more well, and that's Murkmire. Murkmire has Black Rose Prison, which is one of the coolest additions to the game, and it added some of the best sets that you can get, and Bright Throat Boast at the time. That was very widely used. Black Rose Prison is the #1 area you can get experience, in my opinion, if you were to calculate it out. It also added a really unique way to get zone quest rewards and daily quest rewards. It did a lot of unique changes with that, but it just always felt like it was missing something. And it's a very small zone. The storyline feels very contained. It does feel very fun. The first couple quests are exceptionally cool, but it really just loses a lot of its charm on me. And I think a lot of other players feel the same way when we talk about Murkmire. I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity when it comes to, making a zone that stands out above the rest. And that's why it's going to sit at the bottom of the good zone. This next one is Southern Elsewhere. Now, Southern Elsewhere, I'll just tell you off the bat, doesn't have good sets. But what it doesn't have in good sets, it has in Dragons. It has in a cool zone storyline that is not going to overstay its welcome. It is going to give you exactly what you want, and it is going to go to the top of the good zone for doing that. Dragons are still one of the most profitable things to kill in the game, and pretty much every event that requires you to do a public event, its #1 place to go to is Southern Elsewhere. And here's where it loses some points. People don't kill the dragons 24/7, so because of that, you might not even be able to kill them during a non-event, so that could be a bit annoying. It's also unique, some of the changes they made there. For example, Dragon Realm requires you to complete the side quest, the good bits. What's Dragon Realm? Well, it's one of the most profitable things in the game. So to get that, you have to have an achievement that unlocks the ability for you to get the good bits side quest, and that can be frustrating for players. It was a unique change. I actually conceptually like the idea of achievements giving you kind of rewards, and when you have the actual quest done, the good bits, you actually get a daily quest chest that you can open every single day right in front of the daily quest giver. You don't have to do anything. You just open it up and you can get daily quest items. It's almost like you're turning in a daily quest, and those are the types of items that you can receive as rewards. So it was a really unique change, and I think overall I really liked it, but I do think that there are some people that are off-put by some of those concepts. Next up, we have Kinrothi's Roost, which I would just say it's good. Nothing super crazy that it does. There's people that, farm treasure chests here. There's people that fish here. There's people that look, for some of the starter sets here. Nothing phenomenally done well. I will say, though, that its time to get skill points is pretty decent. The ability to get the 6 sky shards here is pretty fast. Overall, that's really what I would say about Kinrothi's Roost. Next up, we have Northern Elsewhere, which is interesting versus its little brother. We're going to put it right next to it. What Northern Elsewhere does right is the quests there are phenomenal. The sets there are decent, namely you can get Crafty Alfiq, which is a great set to sell. The dragons from there still give you Dragon's Blood, Dragon's Bow, Dragon's Realm, profitable to farm. But where it loses points in the eyes of the player base is the dragons are notoriously difficult to get to sometimes. They don't spawn necessarily close to way shrines versus what they do in Southern Elsewhere. I think that's where it loses some points. It also is a much more expansive zone. Lots of mountains. It does have one of the best areas to farm raw materials if you're interested in things like that, which some of you might be, and that area is actually in this bottom area right here. But overall, Northern Elsewhere is a good zone if you're looking for those things. Next is Reaper's March, which I would say is conflicting me in that I think that it's got interesting concepts. So we're going to put it at the bottom of the good zone. Where it gains some points for me is the storyline is fast, the skill points are decent, and it's got the Vile Mance, which is one of the most kind of like uniquely conceptual things as a YouTuber that I find interesting. So what if you don't know what the Vile Mance is? It's very straightforward. All it is a public dungeon that's right here. And it's the only place that you can just farm straight gold, in my opinion, without really having to do anything exceptionally crazy. So what I mean by that is there's a ton of Imperials. You kill the Imperials on the first couple floors, and they just give you straight gold. And a lot of people really love that because there's a lot of you that don't like gold methods that require trading, and I totally get that, totally understand it. And because of that, the Vile Mance is kind of seen as one of those areas where if you just want to farm just gold, you go there. You become an Imperial, you kill Imperials, you get gold. You boost your, champion points and things that require you to get extra gold chances. And then you just go to town on some Imperials there, and people love that. And overall, the rest of the zone, when it comes to getting the things that you need, like your Sky Shards, your quests, it happens quick. It's decent, and overall, I would say that's why it lands in the good zone. Next is Malbator, which is, I'm going to put it in the average zone. I'm going to put it towards the top. I think that it is definitely got some unique things to it. It's got a very fast zone storyline. It's got some good, decent things that drop from here. And notably, I want to tell you, there's a city in Volkswasten where you can pickpocket some provisioners and try to get the Shivering Cheese. What is the Shivering Cheese? It probably deserves its own video, but basically you get it from provisioners that you can get as a chance for pickpocketing them. I believe if you Blade of Woe them too, you can also get a chance to get it that way too. But this is one of the best areas to go get it from. Overall, though, the rest of it is decent, decent sets that you could sell. But it is a base game zone, so its expectations are much lower. That's why it's going to go to the top of that tier. But it is, I always like to point out the uniqueness of it. Green Shade, however, is going to get the average zone treatment. It, unfortunately, it suffers from the East March treatment, where it just isn't super enjoyable. There's nothing that makes it stand out. And its zone story quests actually take you significantly longer to do than East Marches, and it doesn't give you more skill points. So for me, that's why it's going to go to the bottom of the average zones for now. Then we have Grotwood, which is interesting because it is an alliance capital. So because of that, it kind of gives it a little extra oomph, because that's where you get your ability to reset a lot of the things that you'll need to reset. It's got 8 zone story quests there that come relatively fast, don't overstay their welcome, are actually also fairly interesting. So for that, I'm going to put it in the good zone comfortably, right, the second to last. And that's where it's going to stay for me. Nothing super spectacular here, besides just what you would expect from an alliance capital. Bleak Rock Isle is one of those places that I think is just something that you could avoid. And it's not necessarily pointless. It's got 6 zone story quests. They're decently fast. 3 Sky Shards. I will say, though, that it's sometimes hard to find the places on Bleak Rock Isle. I think I remember trying to find the missing villagers from that stupid zone guide. And I remember thinking to myself, this is dumb. Why are they all spread out and hiding all over the place? So for that, it's going to go down to the lower tiers for me. And these next 2, which secretly are not the final ones, are basically our little Deadland zones. And I'm going to say that the actual Deadlands itself is a good zone, but the actual area of Fargrave is fairly the top of average. So why are they different necessarily? Well, for one, Fargrave and Deadlands, you could almost see them as the same zone, but they're kind of not. Fargrave, for example, is kind of like the town versus the actual like area where you can go and loot things. There's really nothing of note that you do in Fargrave that really is anything helpful, except maybe pick up the daily quests. But really, everything that you're going to need to be farming is going to be in the actual other zone, the main Deadland zone. So that for me is why it's going to go as a good zone. The sets there, the Hexos Ward and Kind Marcher's Cruelty are pretty decent to farm. the furnishing plans and the actual motifs that drop from there are okay. Really just kind of nudge it into the good zone. But don't be fooled, this is not the technical end of the list. Unfortunately, there's not like actual signifiers or anything for, you know, these last couple ones. But we need to talk about Galen, because Galen is an important kind of zone for us to hit upon. Galen's got good sets. It's also got the ability for you to go use your treasure maps, get some good motifs from that. It's got a good storyline. If I had to rate it, it would go at the top of the good zone. Doesn't reach amazing for me because especially in a couple months, it's really going to lose all of its flair because people are going to have farmed the Gourmand set really to death. Where would I put the Telvanni Peninsula and Apocrypha? Apocrypha is an S tier zone in my opinion. The storyline is amazing. The fishing holes there are amazing. You get some of the rarest items in the game. I think that it is a must participate in zone. You get 2 companions for doing so, and it's overall great. I guess you could throw the Telvanni Peninsula up there, although I would put the Telvanni Peninsula a little bit lower, just because once you get to the actual Apocrypha, even though technically it's like the same kind of thing, almost like Artaeum and Somerset, it's not as interesting when you're in the Telvanni Peninsula. It's a little more political and, you know, type things, versus once you get to Apocrypha and you're working with Mora directly, it becomes very interesting very fast. So this is the tier list. It is missing, unfortunately, those images, unfortunately. But let me know if you agree or disagree. What would you change? What would you do to this big boy list? I know that every single one of you has a favorite zone. So what is your favorite zone in ESO? Let me know in the comments below. And I just want to thank you guys so much again for sticking around to the end. If you're interested in doing our 3 giveaway drawings, all you have to do is be subscribed. 41% of you, almost even 42% of you guys are now subscribed, which is actually kind of crazy because we were at 40% for so long, and then I started to be like, hey guys, we're 40%, and you guys were like, oh, let's get you to 41, almost 42. And the other way you can enter is by leaving a like on the video. So every single like you leave will be entered into the giveaway. And the third way to enter for our third drawing is a random word we flashed upon the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. So we would pull 1 random subscriber, 1 random like, and then a random comment for the first person to comment the secret word hidden on one of the videos throughout the month. If you've watched one of my videos, you'll have a secret clue as to which video it will be posted on, but do not worry. If you get your notifications on, everyone's got equal chance to see it. So thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye, guys.
Better remember to like and subscribe to Jake Clips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.
Post outro Jake here, just to share with you some of the experiences of what it's like to make YouTube videos. So whenever I record these in clip format, it saves them in chronological order that you take the clips. That makes sense. Then you kind of move them in, edit them, and bada bing, bada boom, you're all good to go. But for some reason, today they decided to jumble them all around, which has now caused me endless craziness and has caused me to lose my mind. But if you're interested, check out yesterday's video where I had my sanity and things were going okay.